Alright, so as you probably figured out by the video title and thumbnail, I lost my first game against the Marsbot from Automa expansion. And yeah, it was pretty close. It ended up being 15 points at the end, and it's a bit long, having to figure out all the rules and stuff. But then I did my second game, and then I was like, I think by then I think I had figured out pretty much how to beat it. But then the Marsbot was like,
And I will rain down an ungodly fucking firestorm upon you. You're gonna have to call the fucking United Nations and get a fucking binding resolution to keep me from fucking destroying you. I am talking scorched earth, motherfucker! I will massacre you! I will fuck you up!
and I lost my second game by over 60 points. Alright, so in all seriousness now, seriously, that's what happened. I lost by 15, and then when I thought it better, I lost by 60 something. And I didn't even count it very well at the end because it was pointless. But yeah, I'm gonna go through basically what it was like. Discuss, give you some general advice just for, not like gameplay, but just things to do when you're playing it. Thoughts on Automa and on adding every expansion, details on my games, and finally my future strategy. So first off, how like it doesn't feel exactly like playing the game. It's like I would say playing the all solo version, the Terraform quickly. It felt a lot like doing Rush, right? This one is supposed to feel closer because you can, every strategy is open now because it's a point game just like the other one, but it's very different to play against, Marspot than an actual opponent, obviously, mostly because of the draft. And, well, there's some things I'll get into as well. And as you add expansions, the way it interacts with those expansions, especially Terminal and Colonies, is very different. Especially Terminal, but then Colonies is very different, right? But yeah, general advice. First off, keep the rule book close. There's a lot of stuff to consult, and even if you've read it all through, it's like, oh, how does this thing on this map? Uh, what should I do here? The rulebook, so far, I haven't found any holes. Like every question I've had, I can go to the rulebook and answer it. Especially for the expansions. So there's three rule books. There's the base Automa, the one with adding incorporations, and the one for adding expansions. And the adding expansions ones is probably the one you'll be going to most, so keep that close when you're playing it. My second advice is to just get a six-sided dice and use it for most of the random stuff. The way the rulebook says you should do it is like sometimes like pick a card and using the price in mega credits of that card count or divide by three, and the six-sided dice works for almost everything. There's a few like the turmoil card. The turmoil card that Marspot uses to decide if it places an additional delegate is just basically a 1 out of 3 chance, which you can do with a six-sided die. Placing a colony is mostly random. So because you're playing a two-player game, you can just count to 5, and 6 is a reroll. And if Aridor is in play, which actually happened, then it's 6 colonies, right? Sometimes the first delegate is going to be the delegate Marspot places. Is gonna fall on a random party, and there's 6 parties, so a six-sided die, helps. And there's a lot of stuff like that. I don't really feel that you need anything else, and that doing the card price thing is quite annoying. Placing tiles too, like it has some ways to decide where the oceans, greeneries, and cities go, but you're always usually gonna end up with a tie of like 2 to 4 tiles, and the six-sided die works great for that. Next up, I would say play with corpse the first time. Now, if you're playing with corpse, you have to play with draft. And I honestly, I did it like that the first time, and I don't want to play the non-corp variety without draft at all. It's actually it's not the advantage that I thought it would be with the corpse, because Marspot actually like the draft, the two corps I tried, the draft priority and the corporations are well designed in my opinion. So yeah, I would play with corpse and draft from the beginning. My next advice would be to play on brutal difficulty. Now, as you know, I got my ass kicked both times doing that, but I don't know, like it'll feel very satisfying when I beat it. But you can also do like start easy, then hard, and brutal. Obviously, at some point, I do advise play it on brutal and try to beat it on brutal. It does feel like it's brutal right now for me, but I'm sure we'll get there eventually. Brutal, basically, the difference are like it gains 1 VP for every card that has a non-negative VP that it played. And if you want to know in detail how to play it, just watch my how to play video. But I'm not gonna go into detail in that in this one. Just explain a few things. Then it's a lot faster at claiming milestones because it has one rule where, depending on how many criteria it meets, it's on the rulebook, but depending on how many criteria it meets and how many milestones have been claimed, you can just automatically claim it instead of waiting for it to be on the track. And then it gets basically an additional project card. And then if you have the terminal expansion, also you can increase the difficulty by reducing the HDR by 7 instead of 10, so it basically gets 3 more points because it doesn't do income. And it gets 2 additional delegates at the beginning. And it's usually outnumbering you in delegates throughout the game. So yeah, I did all those things and did pretty poorly. And my final advice is play Turmoil, because it had been a while for me, and that expansion is just so good. It's my favorite by far. I know I've said this like 1,000 times, but just add Turmoil. It's always good. But anyway, how does Automa play? So it's pretty heavy on the ground early. Now I played Terra Cimmeria in the first game and Bastidas in the second game. And looking at the boards for those, you'll see that most of them have arrows like on the first step, and then you'll see a lot of cities, especially early, and a lot of oceans. And the cities do die down. Now in the Bastidas board, the Earth and Space track went really fast. On the Terra Cimmeria one, it was the event track that just ran through it, and the event track has a lot of terraforming, as you can see. I still haven't detailed all the differences. Like these two look very similar, except like where the microbes are, but the tracks themselves, like they look extremely similar to me. So, yeah, and yeah, but basically, it plays very heavy on the ground at first. A lot of the first actions are like ocean, city, greenery, ocean, city, greenery, and it takes up basically the best spots really easy. I'll get into detail, but in both games I went for a more of a engine strategy, and it didn't work. The other thing is that it's not just ground game; it's lots of cities, and you might think, okay, players who usually play lots of cities early lose because they just overpay for cities, and then they get like 2 greeneries per city, which is usually not enough. And that's true, except Marspot is not paying the cities; they're just getting them. So, if cities were cheap, they'd be like I would put them all over the place. The problem is that they cost 25, right? But yeah, no, Marspot plays a lot of cities early, and I'm gonna try to do that on my next time. I'm gonna try to block with my own cities, but yeah, it just like basically reserved all the good space very early. The third thing I want to say is that it's kind of a beast on milestones on award. On my first game, I got 1 milestone and no awards, and on my second game, I got 0 of both, and I actually paid for 1 award that it flipped on me. Kind of a desperate move, but Yeah, the one thing is that the milestone claims are kind of late on the tracks. Like if you see they're like kind of around mid game, right? So again, if you're not playing on brutal, you'll be losing a bunch of milestones, but you'll have a chance to just claim one or two. If you are playing on brutal, Marspot can more easily claim because of that rule that for example, if it meets the criteria for for as many milestones as there are left, it can claim one. So if there are two milestones left and it meets the criteria for two milestones, it can claim one, and three and one, right? And it just moves so fast on the track sometimes that the milestones like felt pretty easy to play, and the awards in both games I felt like I'm competing for one maybe out of the six because I played with Venus, and so it moves on all the tracks, and it's just that it's just basically participating on all milestones, all awards and all milestones allowed. So I would say rush two milestones. Then the other thing is that it gets a lot of late points, and if you see the tracks again, they are filled with like a lot of TR, in case of the bottom ones, a lot of greeneries, and at the end they all have a bunch of TR. The energy one especially, it didn't get there neither, but yeah, the energy one has a. And then after it gets there, you might think, okay, let's do long game, but remember there's that rule where like it's gonna gain 5 MC every time, and then it starts gaining a lot of victory points per mega credit. So you really don't want to go past 11 generations. I might try a long game, but I think a short game might be the approach for them. For this, and then the other thing is that it plays a ton of cards. So basically, like it plays 4 cards per generation. If you're doing it on brutal, otherwise it's 3, plus additional cards for like the expansion actions like trading and parties, party politics stuff. And so yeah, early in the game it feels like it's doing so much more than you. As the game advances, you'll be doing much more than it because you'll have more money and you'll be doing a lot more things in your turn. But early in the game, it does 5 cards, and it's basically like doing five good cards, right? Because all the attacks count, right? So yeah, I think that's part of why it has an advantage in every milestone and award. But yeah, let's talk about the expansions. I'm gonna start with Preludes, and I'm including Preludes 2 here, obviously, and I think Preludes benefit you. So if you want to have an easier game, I'm gonna have all my games with all expansions. Maybe I'll remove Venus, but I think I'm gonna have all my games with all expansions. But yeah, Preludes I think benefit you because for Marsbot it's basically just like a tag, right? Marsbot essentially gets 3 cards, and you get your 2 Preludes, but Preludes are like cards are worth 21. So, I mean, technically Marsfot could draw cards with lots of tags and make that be worth it, but I think Preludes favor you. They're really like straightforward to play. Marsfot just gets 3 extra cards the first generation, and that's it. But I think they favor you. I'll get into my games, what I did with each one, but yeah, let's talk about Venus. And I think Venus benefits at Automa. It didn't feel playable for me, so that's like my state of Venus after Prelude 2. I really, again, I just didn't get the starting hand. If you don't get the starting hand, you basically don't touch Venus. Now the funny thing is, Venus will be played with Automa because like basically start rejecting all the Venus tags and Automa plays every card. So Venus will get Terraform, which means you might not be doing a heavy Venus strategy, but if you run into things like Stratospheric Birds or Venusian Animals, definitely keep them because Venus will get Terraformed by Automa because all it needs is a Venus tag, right? But it didn't feel, I mean, this is not specific to Automa, it just didn't feel playable with Prelude 2. So that's a shame, but I mean, it's only 2 games. We'll see. Maybe I'll get a more Venus hand in my future games. The other reason I think it still benefits Automa is because, like, remember, a lot of the cards in the Venus expansion are weak. But the Venus track is actually very strong. It's probably one of the tracks that has most actions out of all of them. So, yeah, even if you pass with weak cards, as long as it has a Venus tag, it gets strong actions, right? And the Venus action is just like the float, like the thing on the Venus track is like floaters, and it just draws more cards, which are more actions. So, yeah, I think Venus, but adding Venus benefits Automa or Marsbot more than you. Now onto colonies. Colonies, I think, benefit you. The way colonies work for you is exactly the same. For Marsbot is starting on the second generation. It starts trading, but the way it trades is it gets to, like, it always trades to the highest colony with the highest marker on the trade, and then if it has a colony that's a tiebreaker, but basically it's just hitting the highest colony all the time, but it's always getting 2 resources. And if it has a colony, it gets 3, and it needs 5. So that's basically all it does with the colonies. But that means, and the other thing is the card that trades it is just shuffled into the deck, and it's done at a random step in the turn. So you always get to trade with a better colony, and Marsbot will trade with like alternating colonies, and so it's actually a while before it does something that pays off with colonies, right? And so I think colonies is probably the thing that benefit you the most. But yeah, I mean, also after step 9, it does step 9 on the energy track. It will unlock a second trade fleet, and at that point, it does start like getting the extra card more often. So block, like if you're playing with colonies, you want to block the energy cards, which is kind of fun how that works, right? One problem on Bastidas Borealis is that it was with the city. It was energy and city, so that was harder to block. And yeah, the other thing I think that benefits you is that you can really control where it trades to avoid it getting you basically get all control of who trades where, right? And you always get the best one, unless you get really unlucky, and it's the generation where Marsfot goes first, and it gets that card on top. The deck is usually, with all expansions and Brutal, about 8 cards. So it's a low chance that that happens, right? But it can happen. Finally, Turmoil. I think Turmoil is pretty balanced. I'm not sure who it benefits. The way Turmoil works is Marsbot basically just places delegates and gets the, like, it doesn't get the terraforming rating when it becomes chairman. It doesn't get the policy bonus or the event effect, right? It just dominates the parties and gets the points at the end and prevents you from getting points. That was something I didn't love, because, for example, the Reds, like, you have no incentive to put them in play because they don't affect it. And at the beginning of the game, you're usually going to have a higher terraforming rating than Marsbot because it drops like 7 spots. And so it's basically just playing the long game, and you'll realize by the end of the game it's going to have a delegate everywhere. And it's going to be a pirate lead everywhere, so it's just going to get like maybe 2 or 3 points, and maybe a chairman. But yeah, it doesn't interact, but you do get to interact, so you do get to put your parties and the things you like the most. It's a shame about the Reds, because they're probably my favorite party, and they felt useless. Even though I didn't realize that until after I put them in power. But anyway, let's get into how my games went. My first game, Automa got Aridor, which is, and like I said, I played it on Terra Cimmeria. I think Pluto and Luna were my colonies, both were in play, so I just had a ton of fun there. And the thing with Aridor, the rule is like it gets a bunch of markers all over every track, and whenever it hits one of those, it moves the event track. Now the event track, as you can see, is a pretty fast track. It has like 3 fast forward arrows, and it's full of points in terraforming. It's one of the strongest tracks, so I actually think Aridor was quite strong as a corporation. Probably stronger the one I played in the second game, even though I didn't lose by that much in that one. But yeah, and then I was Priestar. I got my combo with a new preload that gives you a bunch of TR, and the game went 9 generations. The thing is, I didn't realize until like after I put them in power that the Reds, and that's just me being stupid, right? That the Reds wouldn't do anything, and so, I mean, Priestar is still pretty strong, but it wasn't as strong. So I basically I terraformed the first generation because of the prelude, and then 8 and 9 to finish the game. I finished the game in 9 generations. You should probably go 10. I finished both in 9, but you should probably go 10 because you're not paying extra. It's not getting extra VPs at that point yet. But yeah, that game it dominated the ground. It dominated the terraforming early. I did terraform a lot late, and I got a good amount of points on my cards, but I lost the milestone and award battle. And again, it could be because I'm not used to this map. So yeah, I'm also doing it on the new map. So maybe on the other ones I would have been more aware to fight for one. But I think it boiled down to that. And I thought both were really strong. Like Aridor and Priestar are very strong corp. I mean the Automa version of Aridor, but Priestar just feels so strong. When you play it, they felt less strong after I stopped doing the Reds things because, well, it's a shame about the Reds really. Now my second game, I went with Saturn Systems. I got a pretty Jovian heavy hand with Planetary Alliance. I also had Earth Office in my hand, and I had is it Galilian Station or Galilian Mining? That preload that gives you 2 titanium. And I had Saturn Systems. Now the fun thing about the Jovians is that you can pass them, and like the expensive Jovians, you can pass them early, and you can still get your effect, right? So it felt like an advantage against Automa. Automa was playing Point Luna. And the thing with Point Luna is that every time it hits the Earth track, it either moves basically every other step, it either moves the lowest track or the space track. So, and so basically, with me having Planetary Alliance and Earth Office, and it being Point Luna, it should have been a really good game for me, but I didn't see that many Earth tags, right? Now, the other shitty thing is that the Earth tag on the Vestidas Borealis board is also the Jovian track, and I passed some Jovians to it because they were not great Jovians and expensive, and that also moved the air track, and so that part of the strategy didn't work. At the end, I did keep most of the Jovians, obviously, but the ones I passed, I was like, it was nice to get the +1 production, but it also kept moving its Earth track, which was its strongest track, because it's basically a 2-for-1, right? Now, in this game, the colonies sucked, and that was amazing. I didn't place colonies, actually. I got Titan, Enceladus, Europa, Io, and Callisto. And I think those are the 5 worst. I've never had a game like that. And my whole hope was to get a floater card, and I didn't get one, because, floaters and Jovians have their thing going. But I didn't get one, and so I traded a couple of times with Titanium to Callisto and Io for temperature steps. I don't like Europa. Enceladus microbes card usually suck. I didn't get one. It didn't go with my strategy, and so yeah, colonies. Even though I said that it's in your favor, it was not. It was completely in its favor for that game. Part of the reason why I got my ass kicked so bad. The other thing is that in this map in Bastidas, it just took over this middle section between the 2 ocean sections, and it was just too fast to do it. It started moving the Earth track, which has a city immediately, but it placed like 3 cities, 4 oceans, and 3 granaries very quickly. So I was out of the ground game. I think it outscored me 3-1 in the ground game. It got every milestone and award, and it got a bunch of points because I'm playing with that role where it beat me on the point game. I didn't get good Jovian point cards, and yeah, this was just a disaster of a game. But anyway, so how do I think I beat it in the future? Well, Basically, I think you have to go ground focused early. So I'm gonna place. You gotta block him with cities the way you would someone who's ocean walking. Except it's a little harder because it often plays its cities first, right? So your cities are harder to use for blocking if its cities are already down. But I do think you need a more ground focused and terraforming focused game to beat it. Or maybe try for a long game, but I'm not gonna do that next time. I'm really gonna try to go on the ground. I mean, it will depend on my hand, but I'm really gonna try to go on the ground and finish the game early and get like with ground points that you can win. The way I did it, you can't. The other thing, I think I'm gonna go for 2 milestones early, and just basically build my early game into that, which in 2 player I don't usually do. I just usually like go for one a bit aggressively, and then I try to get the other one. But you want to favor economic development over that second milestone most of the time. I think I'm gonna try to get to that second milestone earlier, and like I said, block it with cities and have a bit more of an early ground game. And the other thing is the temperature track. So I don't know. It could have been the way that those games develop, but it feels like it. Like if you see these maps, it feels like it does a lot more cities and greeneries than temperature. Like I see here 15 greeneries and how many temperature steps? 15 temperature steps, right? So it's the same, and the greeneries are like stacked earlier, and yeah, greeneries are earlier, oceans are earlier. It's the same amount of and the temperature check has 19 steps. There's only 14 steps on the oceans. Like it always felt like it gave me more control on the temperature track than it did on the oxygen track, and so I think going for heat early could work, which is basically the opposite. If you watch this channel, you know it's not how I like to play, but yeah, I think you basically have to rush it. So that's what I'm gonna try next time. After that, maybe I'll go for a 12 or 13 generation game before the points to make a credit ratio on the Automa table gets too horrible. Because in both, I think it finishes with around 40 MC, something like that. 40. One it finished with like 30 something, and the other one almost was 50. So I'm gonna say 40 on average. So I think up to 13 generations, it's 1 per MC. Like 14, that it's already like nasty, right? It gets to 10, and then like if you go to 16, which I mean that would be too many hours. It gets to 20. The other thing, my first game was really long. I kept going back to the rule book. It was like 5 hours. The second game was actually like 3 hours. So it gets faster as you learn it better. But anyway, I do recommend it. It doesn't feel exactly like playing the game. It doesn't feel exactly like playing the solo game. But it's really good. And you can play with Turmoil. So Turmoil is the best. Right. Anyway, that's all I have for my Automa thoughts. Let me know what you think. And see you next time.